I've had many questions in my faith journey. One of the questions that I've always had is, if there is an almighty, all-powerful God of the universe, then why doesn't He show Himself, come down from heaven with thunder and lightning? And then everyone will say, yes, I believe in God, I've seen Him. It is still a good question today. We are here in Varaždin, Croatia, which is a small town or small city outside of Zagreb, the capital of Croatia. And my family, my wife and 3 daughters, came here. And we so much enjoyed walking the city streets, going into the shops and meeting the people, going down to the marketplace and the city square, and enjoying a slower pace of life. And one of the most iconic places here in Varaždin is this castle. And it is a castle which evokes thoughts of kings and queens, princes and princesses. And it reminds me of a story called The King and the Maiden. And this story tells us much about God. There was a king who was rich and powerful, and he loved his people. But the king never knew for sure whether his people loved him or merely feared him. And the king fell in love with a young maiden of the village. But the king had a dilemma. If he brought the young maiden to his castle with all of his power and glory and majesty, she would surely be overwhelmed. And if he expressed his desire to be with her, to live with her, she would say yes. But the king would never know whether she truly loved him or merely feared him. If the king went to her village and showed up with his retinue, his regalia, and his court, then she would be overwhelmed there as well. Her family would be overwhelmed. And so he would face the same dilemma. The king thought to himself, well, perhaps I'll go into the village, disguise myself as a commoner, and then after a few days, a few weeks perhaps, I'll reveal myself to her as being the king. But then he thought, she may view herself to have been deceived, and then she would not love him either. So the king decided to actually leave his castle with all of its splendor and to go into the village and to live as a commoner, as a day laborer for all the rest of the days of his life, all for the purpose and desire to win the young maiden's heart. This story of the king and the maiden is in fact the Christian story in which God, through Jesus Christ, becomes human, becomes like one of us, so that He might win our hearts and lives for Him. This is commonly referred to as the Incarnation, in which Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who is God Himself, becomes human, takes on human form and human flesh, and lives and dwells amongst His people. And through this, He shows us what God is really like, His heart and His love for us. And He gives us the freedom of choice to willingly love Him and follow Him. The Apostle John was one of the early followers of Jesus, and one amongst whom Jesus lived and dwelt. And John wrote one of the gospel accounts which are found in the Bible, which are early accounts of Jesus' life and ministry. And in John's gospel, John repeatedly emphasizes how Jesus Christ is a king who has come into the world, but a king who desperately loves His people and who ultimately will go to the cross on behalf of His people to die as their only Redeemer. John's Gospel says this: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. In Him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. We have seen His glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." Well, thank you so much, John, and it is indeed an honor and a pleasure to be here. God has opened up so many doors for us to work both in the U.S. and around the world and sharing the gospel, and yet every time I come back here, I am so incredibly blessed. One, Southern California is just a nice place to be, but really, it is the love that is found here at the Hilltop Church of Christ. So thank you so much for allowing me to come and to share a few thoughts with you here today. I love your mission. I love the fact you're focusing on the most important thing, upon loving God, loving neighbors, and your mission of reaching out to the world. And love, of course, is what drives us in all that we do. I have a heart for sharing Christ with others, and our ministry is called Next Generation for Christ. And I've always had a heart for sharing Christ with others, but now in particular it's my own family, the generation that's growing up today, that's growing up in a world that is so different from even the world that I grew up in. And my oldest daughter, for instance, I'm blessed to have a wife of 22 years, wonderful wife Becky, and my 3 daughters, Gina, Emily, and Kaylee. And these are wonderful girls, and so blessed to have them. And my oldest daughter is growing up in a world in which only 17% of the U.S. population attends church today. And so it's a very different world that they're growing up in. But I have to tell you that sharing Christ with people today, reaching the next generation, is a challenge. My oldest daughter, Gina, when she was 5 years old, we went up to my wife's mother's house, and there went to go visit them. And when I was there, I started getting really sick. I mean, I was just coughing and sneezing and just not doing well at all. In fact, I had to go spend the night at a hotel room. And the reason was because I'm allergic to cats, and she had a cat. A really bad cat, apparently. A really rancid cat. So I come back at home, and my oldest daughter, who at the time was 5 years old, was talking to my wife, Becky, and she says to her, "Mom, I'd really like us to get a cat." My wife says, "Honey, your dad's allergic to cat. We can't get a cat." She said, "We could keep it outside." She said, "No, it'd get out and run around in the neighborhood." She said, "We could build a fence." Well, in our neighborhood, the fences had to have spaces. That won't work. She said, "We could keep it in the garage." She said, "Honey, we're not going to keep the cat in the garage." Finally, she pauses, and finally she says, "Mom, does everyone die?" I said, "Well, yes, honey. Eventually everyone dies." She said, "Will Dad die?" "Yes, eventually your dad will die." "If Dad dies, can I get a cat?" And then just recently, my current 5-year-old daughter, Kaylee, said to my wife, she said, "I'd really like us to get a cat." I said, your father is allergic to cats. She said, "Does Dad have to live with us?" Well, you know what? It's kind of hard to love people if you don't live close to them and share life with them. And it's hard to reach people for Christ if you're not in a loving relationship with them. And so this morning, I want to talk about this love for God and how that can help us reach the world for Jesus Christ. This love for God and love for neighbor. And I love the story of the king and the maiden, because it's a story which reminds us about how much God loves us. And though God's up in heaven with all of his glory and majesty, he chooses to come down to earth and to live and dwell amongst us. The Bible opens up with a passage of Scripture that's pretty bold. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." So it's this powerful picture of a powerful God who makes the earth and the heavens and everything in it. But, if that God just showed himself right here today with all of his power and glory and majesty, man, we would be blown away. But we might just fear God. We might not truly love him. And so the Gospel of John opens up in a very similar manner, where it says that in the beginning there was God. There was this Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was and is God. And so Jesus Christ is this Word of God who comes into the world in the flesh. And I love how the Message translation talks about Jesus Christ coming into the world. It says that the Word became flesh and blood and moved, note this, into the neighborhood. What is it that we're seeking to do? Be a church that loves God and neighbor be a neighboring church. And we see this example from Jesus Christ that he moves into the neighborhood. He literally takes flesh and blood. He didn't just appear to be human. He actually was human, took human form, and he did this all with the hope and desire that he might win our hearts. And then John says this as well. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. I present to you this morning that if we're going to reach the world for Christ, we must do it as Christ did and follow his example of loving others and showing them grace and truth as we live amongst our neighbors. Love, of course, is a theme that is found throughout the Gospel of John. You may have heard John 3:16 or seen it written on various advertisements or sometimes sports figures where John 3:16 underneath their eyes, Tim Tebow types. What is John 3:16? It says, "For God so loved the world that he did what? That he gave his one and only Son." So the Father is in heaven. He sends his Son into the world out of his love for us. The Father willingly comes. Jesus says, I will go to this world. And the Spirit it comes into the world, and he's been sent out ahead of us. And so as we go into the world, we're taking up the mission of Jesus Christ, and we're following Christ's example. And love of God, of course, is what we are called to be about. Jesus himself said, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind and soul and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And then he said the second commandment is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So what does it mean to be a loving church, a church that is a neighboring church that loves God and loves neighbor? Well, one, it means to be in physical proximity to people. But it also means to be people who are present emotionally and invested in people's hearts and lives. And we see that in Jesus. And there's a story that is found in John's Gospel that shows how Jesus actually, he didn't just kind of float along the neighborhoods. He actually lived in the neighborhoods, lived in the world, and he invested in the people around him. And he had a heart for those around him. Jesus made many friends while he was on earth, and one of those friends was a man named Lazarus. So in John chapter 11 it says that there was a man named Lazarus, and he was sick. This friend of Jesus, and he was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And so the sisters sent word to Jesus and said, Lord, the one that you what? The one that you love is sick. So they recognized that this was someone that Jesus had invested his life in. And they told him, this man is sick. Now, how do you respond when those around you are sick? Well, Jesus, when he heard this, he said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So Jesus knows that what's going to happen to this. Lazarus is going to pass away. He knows or is willed that he's going to raise him from the dead. But notice, when Jesus actually hears that Lazarus has died, he doesn't say, oh, well, you know what? No big deal. He's going to be brought back to life. Even though that's what Jesus would do. It says that when Jesus heard that Lazarus had died, what did he do? It says that Jesus wept. The shortest verse in the Bible, but one of the most profound, because it shows that Jesus genuinely cared for his friends and his neighbors. There's a story that has always struck me as being both profoundly illustrative of failing to love God and neighbor, as well as a powerful story of showing love to God and neighbor. And that's a story about the civil war that happened in Rwanda in the 1990s. There was a missionary couple, Carl and Teresa Wilkins, that went to Rwanda, and there they were there to share the gospel, and they went there to get to know people and to invest in their lives and find ways to tell people about Jesus. And in Rwanda was ruled over by many years by the Belgians. And the Belgians had divided the Rwandans into two different groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis, based upon very superficial physical differences. And there was tension between these two groups. And when the president of Rwanda, his plane was shot down, that was a signal for one of the groups, the Hutus, to go and begin slaughtering the Tutsis. And that night, bands of people, bands of men, went throughout all the cities and the villages with machetes. And they killed some 500,000 to 1 million people. And one of these bands with machetes came to the home of this missionary couple. And there they were going to kill them. And do you know who it was that interceded on their behalf? It was their neighbors. They said, "You can't kill this couple." They said, "You don't understand." And they began to talk about how they brought them medicine in the middle of the night, how they had fed them, and how they had shown such love and kindness to them. And nothing seemed to get through to the would-be killers. And finally they said, "You don't understand. Their children play with our children. Their children play with our children." You see, they had not viewed their neighbors as a project. They had not superficially got to know them. They had actually lived life with them. And that caused their lives to be saved that night, and it allowed them to go on and to save the lives of many others and to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with those around them. If we want to reach people for Christ, people have to know and believe and see that we genuinely love them out of selfless motives. And that kind of love can transform the world. Our motivation for sharing Christ with others is our genuine love for others. And as we do this, we seek to bless people by the lives that we live. And that's what that missionary couple did. They showed love and grace to their neighbors. And we read about this grace in the opening section of Scripture in the Gospel of John, where it says that from the fullness of the grace of Christ, we have all received one blessing after another. So it talks about how Jesus Christ became human, took on flesh and blood, moved into the neighborhood, and then it says, from the fullness of His grace, we have all received one blessing after another. This king comes into the world. One of the words that is often used of a king is what? His grace. His grace. Your grace. And Jesus graces the world with His presence. And what does He do? He goes around and He heals people. He feeds the hungry. He cures those who are suffering from blindness. He brings hope to the captives. He brings blessing into so many people's lives. And we have too been blessed by God and blessed by Christ. And so because we have been blessed, because we have been loved, we seek to be a blessing to others. That has always been the Christian story. God said to Abraham, "I'm going to bless you, and from you there's going to be one who comes who will bless the entire world." And I have to tell you, I have been so blessed by God. I grew up in a Christian home. I have a wonderful, beautiful wife, 3 beautiful children. Have I told you how beautiful my kids are? I mean, I have no excuse. How can I not share the goodness and blessing of Jesus Christ with those around me? And this is what we are called to do with everyone that God blesses us with in our lives. We have some neighbors on our street. We have a number of different neighbors. We have people who look just like us, and we have people from just around the world. It's one of the things I love about Washington, D.C. There's people from everywhere. And so many people are so grateful to be there. Many of them have won a lottery to come to the U.S. They're hardworking. They're just thrilled to be in the United States. And so we have people on our street from all kinds of countries, from Africa, from China, and several from India. And one of our neighbors, they're a mid-aged couple, and when we were going into this ministry in some full-time, and we were looking at some different parts of the world that we were going to and doing work and ministry, they thought maybe that we were going to move, and they said, tell us about your ministry. We want to help with that. And the interesting thing is they're Hindu, okay? And they said, look, we don't want you to move. And they're talking to my wife, and she said, well, we're not planning to. We're planning on staying right here. They said, no, you don't understand. They said, before you came here, no one spoke to us. They said, we were so excited to come to this country and to move into this great neighborhood. And after 6 months, we realized that nobody cared that we were here. And no one wanted us here. And you know what? The people on our street, we've gotten to know so many of our neighbors. And we have a shared alleyway in which our kids get together and they play with their kids. But this is a couple that people don't mean to exclude, but they do. Because they're from a different country. They have a different faith and religion. They don't have children, even though they're a middle-aged couple. And apparently, no one speaks to them. And let me tell you, we haven't done anything heroic. We've simply tried to greet them, invite them into our home. At our holiday parties, we invite them in. And whatever love and kindness we've shown to them, it is only because God has shown such love and kindness to us. And the things that we take for granted in Christian fellowship of people praying for us and bringing us food and all those things, understand if someone is outside of Christ, outside of a church fellowship, they may not know those blessings at all. And so the smallest act of kindness done in the name of Christ can have a profound impact upon your neighbors. Yes, your physical neighbors. But also, when we talk about love of neighbor, we need to recognize that there are other people that we may have regular contact with that constitute our neighbors. In fact, people are always trying to limit the neighbors when they were talking to Jesus. Well, who is my neighbor? And Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, if you know that story. But whoever it is that God has placed in our lives, we have an opportunity to show that blessing and that love to them as well. There was a woman that we got to know over a course of a number of months who worked in a Starbucks, and her name was Kara. And when we talked to Kara as we went in to the Starbucks, we'd try to find out about her life and just interact with her, show interest in who she was. And we had a Christian book talk that was in that Starbucks. And as we went in there, we would read Christian books. We'd invite people to explore the Christian faith, and we just try to get to know the people that were there in that shop. And one of the things that we encourage everyone to do is try to bless people's lives each week. Try to find three different people to bless. One a Christian, one someone who's kind of outside the faith. The third, you can choose whoever it is that you want to try to bless. And so I had this back in my mind of we need to be blessing people, plus I was interacting with Kara. And one day I came into the Starbucks, and she asked me about the book that we were reading. And it was a book called Blue Like Jazz, which is a book by Donald Miller. It's about kind of spirituality and Christian faith. And she said, "What's that about?" I said, "Well, it's a book about Christianity, not churchianity." And she said, She said, "I think churches are kind of like cults." But she said, I like that.
following Jesus stuff. I thought it was an interesting conversation. We went back and had our little book talk. And then I went back home, and I thought, we had a little something there. A little conversation. She expressed a little interest in this. I thought, what should we do? I thought, I'm a minister. I'm supposed to know what to do here. So I thought. So I went and bought her a copy of the book, and I wrote in and I said, Dear Kara, thank you so much for serving us with a smile each time. I can tell you have a heart like Jesus because you love people. I said, if there's everything that we can do for you, pray for you, bless, anyway, please let us know. James. Next week I went back in. It was our time for our book talk, and I go through the line, I give her the book, she's busy, she's like, oh, thanks, So we go back and we have this little book talk, and towards the end of it, she comes up to me, she says, James! I said, what? She said, I read the first few chapters of that book during my break. She said, it was great. And then she said, and thank you so much for that note that you wrote me. She said, that's the nicest thing that anyone's ever done for me. I thought, that's the nicest thing that anyone's ever done for you? But in a world that does not know Jesus Christ, even the smallest act of love and kindness done out of genuine love can have a profound impact upon people's lives. Jesus, for 30 years, lived in a neighborhood, lived in Nazareth, seemingly in relative obscurity. He got to know the people there. He lived there, and he blessed the people around it. And then as he began his ministry, he blessed people in so many profound ways. And so if we can show this love and kindness, show grace, find ways to bless people, it can have an impact upon their lives. But we must do more than just good deeds and just acts of kindness. We also have a message to share. And it says that when Jesus came into the world, he brought both grace and truth. And there's a truth that we have to bring to the world. Now, I have to confess to you, when I hear that word, I almost, it makes me pause, because it seems like sometimes when we use the word truth, it's like a weapon. Like truth is like, there to beat people over the heads. But when I look at truth in the Gospel of John, it is so much associated with life and good things. Jesus himself said, I am the way, the truth, and the what? Life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Sometimes I have this image like Jesus is there standing in the way of the Father, like he's blocking the door to the Father. But Jesus says, I'm the door, actually. I'm the one. I'm the way that you go to the Father. And so we want to share Christ with people because we want them to have life and goodness and blessing in their life. And they won't know about this Jesus Christ unless we tell them about him. Otherwise, they may simply believe that we are nice people, and they may not connect it to the saving truth that is found in Jesus Christ. Earlier this year, I was in India, and there it was so obvious that people needed Jesus Christ, because it's a country in which only 3% of the population is Christian, 80% Hindu, and the rest a mix of Muslim and a lot of other things. Everywhere you go, there are statues, there are idols. And I was driving in the taxis and the cars that have little gods hanging down from the rear view mirror. I mean, it was so obvious. You'd see these statues all alongside the road. And we were in a village, and it was there teaching and preaching, and there were these 4 young women, and they had not yet accepted Christ. And here's the thing: if they accepted Christ, they would be shunned in their village. They would not be able to marry anyone. And by the way, if you convert there, you can't give away your daughters in marriage either, because it's arranged marriages. There's no dating, and so in order to convert, it's a big deal. So for someone like that to come to faith in Jesus Christ, what do they have to experience? They have to experience a loving community and believe that when they enter into this, that their life is going to be better. And we have to believe that. We have to believe that we have something to share that improves people's lives, that gives them hope, that gives them salvation, because that will motivate us to want to share with others. If we think it makes no difference in our lives or in other people's lives, then yeah, we'll let social awkwardness or fears of whatever it is that goes through our mind of not sharing Christ with others get in the way of actually sharing the truth of Jesus Christ. But if we genuinely believe that we have a hope, that we have something the world does not have, that will motivate us to share Christ with others. And it may not be as obvious today as we go around. We may not see statues and idols and all those kinds of things. But are there other gods that are being worshipped in this world? Absolutely. You may have heard the story recently of a young woman who was dating a man, and he was suicidal. And she instead of discouraging from that, she urged him to go ahead and do this. And he said, I don't want to do it. And she said, no, people that talk about committing suicide don't just talk about it, they do it. So go ahead and just do it. And sadly, the young man committed suicide. And later, when this came out, she posted, LOL, I'm famous. Whether it's fame or money or popularity, power, control, whatever it is, there are alternative gods in this world. And the world without Christ is lost. Jesus Christ entered into the world, showed us love, grace, and truth. And we must show that love, grace, and truth to others as well. Our world needs truth and life. And we have something to share. A message and a hope. As Jesus began to call his disciples, there were some that were a little bit skeptical that this king, this Messiah that they'd heard about, was from the small town of Nazareth. And one of the disciples, one of the would-be disciples, as Jesus was calling him, said, hey, the Messiah is from Nazareth? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? And Philip, one of Jesus' followers, said what? Come and see. Come and see. As you show love and kindness to people, there may be questions. They may say, can something really good come out of this place? Maybe they say to us, can something good come out of you? Maybe we haven't been the perfect example, whatever it may be. But if we can point towards Christ, away from us and to Christ, and say, come and see what God has done. And as I have talked with you and listened to you, I have heard the good, wonderful things that God is doing here in this place. Of people coming to faith, of people coming to celebrate recovery, of young adults flocking together and coming together and sharing Christ and sharing life together. There is God at work in this place. And you have a message and you have a hope that you can share with the world. And know that the love and kindness and prayer and fellowship, everything that we experience, that we take for granted, the world, if they experienced it, if they knew it, would clamor to find it. But we must share this message and hope with them. And ultimately, we see in Jesus Christ that he is the King who comes into the world and gives up his life for others. John chapter 13, we see that Jesus, as he enters towards the end of his life, it says, having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. And then Jesus began to wash his disciples' feet that night that he was betrayed. And then Jesus would go to the cross and give up his life for his people. My friends, we are called to be like Christ, to love the world, which means sacrificing for them, blessing those around us, showing love, showing grace, showing kindness, and sharing the truth of Jesus Christ with those who do not know him. And God can take our feeble efforts, our tiniest blessings, the tiniest words that we speak, And he can do something powerful with those blessings and those words that we share. There was a missionary to the Congo that about 100 years ago, William Leslie, went to the Congo, and there he sought to share Christ, and he was there for 15 years. And it seemed like he wasn't getting anywhere. He was butting his head up against the wall. He was butting heads with the leaders that were there. And in fact, when he left, he didn't leave on very good terms with the tribal leaders. And he went home, and he thought that he was an utter failure. But a few years ago, a group of archaeologists and missiologists went to the Congo, and there they found a network of villages across the Congo that were Christian. And in fact, they had even built up a sanctuary of about 1,000 people that came together and gathered and worshiped God. And when they traced how this came about, how these villages of people that worshipped Christ, that were glittering like diamonds in the sand, and when they traced back the roots of that Christian movement, they traced it back to this one missionary, William Leslie, who 100 years ago left the Congo thinking that he was an utter failure. You may believe that your words, your kindness, your deeds, whatever you've done, are having no effect. But know this: God will not allow any good deed done in His name to go unnoticed. And it may be that the seeds that you are sowing today, and that hopefully you will sow even more, will cause many people to come to faith in Jesus Christ. I pray that this church continues on this mission, that as you go through changes and challenges and new opportunities, that you keep this mission of God in the foremost of your mind, that you continue to love God, love your neighbor as yourself, and that you seek to reach the world for Jesus Christ. May God be with you and bless all of your efforts. This morning, so glad that you're here. I pray that you know this Jesus Christ. If you would like to find out more about Him, I know there are loving people here that would love to share more about the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. You need prayer. You'd like to put Christ on in baptism. You'd like to become more involved here. This is a place seeking to make the most important thing what this church is all about. Loving God, but loving our neighbor as ourselves.